Namaskar, hello and welcome to NCRT's live phone and interactive program. My name is Tanvi Khurana and today is 27th of December and is the first day of our online training on virtual labs. This initiative is in collaboration with CIET NCRT and CDAC Mumbai. We also have an expert who will be talking about today's topic, which is virtual labs, pedagogical and technology affordances. Let me introduce you to our today's expert. We have with us Dr. Shashi Kumar M. Welcome, sir.
Namaste.
Namaste, sir. Sir is an executive director from CDAC Mumbai, and we'll be talking about virtual labs throughout this training. And today's topic is going to be there in discussion, and there'll be a presentation as well by the sir. So if you have any questions, any queries, please feel free, register yourself, participate in this training, and also raise your questions through our YouTube channel, which is NCERT Official. In the live chat box, write down your questions, queries, and share them with us. If you want to email us, the email ID is training@ciet.nic.in. If you want to give us a call, the number is 8800440559. It's on your screen as well. Please note it down very carefully. And virtual labs, like we say, online labs or even O labs. During COVID-19, it proved to be really efficient in educational training. So virtual labs, it enables schools to perform various experiments and activities without any physical labs or limits. So let's begin this discussion, and I would like to ask sir, what exactly are we going to learn in this particular session?
So today we are going to talk about virtual labs in a little general sense, what it means, what are the affordances that it provides pedagogically and technologically, and in the remaining 4 days, we will actually get more details into the individual labs, and we'll talk about how a physics lab works and how chemistry lab works. So today I will set up the context, why, what, where, and then so that we can move in later from tomorrow.
Okay. So shall we begin, sir?
Yes. To start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So a very good afternoon to everyone who is listening to this program through whatever media that is available to you. So I'm going to talk about virtual labs and specifically the OLabs experience. And as Madam mentioned, OLabs is something that has actually come out to be a very, very strongly supportive intervention during this pandemic period, and people, many have realized the importance that these kind of virtual labs can do in the assessment in the school curriculum. So I'll talk about a little generally about what does a virtual lab experience means, what can it do for you, what are the possible things that it might be a concern for you, and so then we can delve more deeply into the specific labs from subsequent classes. So OLabs is basically virtual labs for school environments, and it's a project that is supported by MIT, that is Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. It has been a 10-year-old long journey so far. We have started in 2010 with a minimal set of about 20 labs, and then we grew into about 173 labs that has now become available. And these labs cover science, maths, and English. And on the right side, I've actually given you the specific subjects, the physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and English. And one of the decisions that we took in the beginning was that this kind of educational content need to be freely available to all the interested students. So olabs.edu.in contains the entire content of these virtual labs, and they are free for use. So you can just go onto the website and access any of these labs as much as you would you like. And the experience so far has been fantastic, and particularly as was mentioned during the pandemic, people have realized the value of an intervention like this. And so CBSEs, NCRT are all fully supportive of this initiative that's actually happening. We are now aiming for the next phase of 500 more labs that's going to come out in over the next 2 to 3 years. So the OLABS website again is olabs.edu.in. I will also put it at the end of the final slide. And we are also moving this now to the Diksha platform, so you will get a more integrated experience with your other content and other resources in an integrated form. So as I mentioned, we have 173 labs as of now. There are 54 labs in physics, 46 in chemistry, 36 in biology, 25 in mathematics, and 12 lab activities in English. They cover classes 9, 10, 11, and 12. And we have also made these labs available in English, Hindi, Malayalam, and Marathi. So these illustrate that it is possible to make these labs available in any Indian language or in any language of our choice by translating the content. As a base, we have actually made it available in these 4 languages. So these resources are currently available, and we have also been conducting a lot of teacher training programs over the last 4 to 5 years. And as of now, about 50,000 teachers, mostly from CBSE schools, have been trained in use of this technology over the last few years. Okay, so if you want to see what OLABS the web page looks like, this is the opening page of olabs.edu.in. So when you type in that name on the address bar, this is the page that comes up. It's just 2 parts. I'm just giving you the top part in this slide and the bottom part in the next slide. So most of the typical information, like how do you join a training program, how do you register, and the workshop details and things like that are available on the top line. And the main part of the website is divided into subjects. So you have separate blocks for physics, chemistry, biology, maths, and English. You can click on any of these, and then you get a list of all the labs that's available on that subject. You can click on that particular lab, and then you get into the details of how that lab is to be done. That part I will come back to in a little while. The bottom part of this page is basically a little bit of introduction, and there is also some statistics. As of now, we have 4 lakh, almost 4.5 lakh registered users. Please note, registration is not mandatory for making use of the labs. These are basically to allow us to get feedback and specifically connect with the users. So and we also have a feedback mechanism under every lab. So if you like some comments to how to improve, or what you like something, you don't like something, you can actually give this feedback to us as well. So as I mentioned, the journey started around 2010, 2011, 12. We created the first set of labs, which about 30 labs, and there we approached the CBSE. CBSE loved what was actually coming up. The then chairman actually sent out the circular to all the schools saying that these labs, just 30 of them, can actually be used as it is. So it has, from then, I think there has been no looking back. That has convinced our parent ministry that this is a worthwhile initiative. So they funded the main part of the labs, which is about 170 labs. This was also completely reviewed by CBSE, and we also shifted the hosting to NKN for an easier and wider access to all the schools in the country. 2015 to 20, we actually was engaged in a rollout program, and that time itself about 40,000 teachers were trained across India on how to use it, what are the ways of, what are the affordances and things like that. And 2020, of course, taught everyone in the world a lot of new things. And one of that was that suddenly, even if your school had the full-fledged lab, it was not accessible. So you needed to find an alternative, and all labs actually rose to the occasion and could actually meet the requirement quite comfortably for most of the schools in India. And with that backdrop, we are now moving on 2021 into OLABS NG, which is the next generation OLABS with 500 more labs covering classes 6 to 12 and covering almost every subject that is covered in these classes. So I think it's an amazing journey that we look forward for you to join us. Now, with that backdrop, we look back and say, what does virtual labs mean, and why should I be looking at something like that? How does it actually compare with, let's say, the lot of animations and those fancy pictures that you've been seeing in TV advertisements? The labs in education is fundamental to learning, because laboratories are recognized as important devices in the learning process. because you learn about some concepts, the Newton's law, or Hooke's law of elasticity, or any physics concepts, chemistry, biology. So you want to feel actually feel in the real life. So when you hit a wall with your hand gets hurt, and that is Newton's third law in place. That's what your physics teacher would say. So what are the labs provide a way to experiment with things and kind of demonstrate what has been learned, what has been taught in the class, and it also gives you a way to experiment with various configurations and reinforce what has actually been taught, whether it is correct and how does it actually work in practice. It connects the theory to the real life, and we all know that particularly in subjects like science, experimenting is the key paradigm. So you actually try things out, and that is when you actually learn the concepts deeper. So science labs are well understood, but now we are actually extending this concept of labs from beyond science into languages, into mathematics, into social sciences, into other areas. So that's a journey that we are currently in the middle of. Further, this quote that you put on the slide is something that I'm sure you would have heard about. Tell me, I will forget. Show me, I may remember. Involve me, I will understand. So the best way to internalize a content is to actually play around with it. Something that you actually conduct something. When you suspend a spring on a stand, put different weights, and you measure the elongation of the spring, and then you are able to plot a graph, there is a much deeper memory, much more internalization of that content. So involving the learner in the learning process, or in this, one of the best ways is to build up a lab. So labs are very important, from building up the higher order thinking skills, a practical experience of what has been learned, instead of just being textbook knowledge. So this is something that is very well understood across. However, this is not being very practical for many reasons, right? So if you want to have a physics lab or a chemistry lab, you need to have a physical lab setup. You need to stock a lot of raw material, whether it is your chemicals or springs or stands or whatever. And if you have 30-40 people to do the lab, you need a full-fledged setup. And there are cost and space requirements. And there are schools which may be lacking that kind of infrastructure. There may be limited access to this. And in the traditional school mode, there is something called a lab hour. So let's say Thursday afternoon, there is a 1 hour physics lab. So all the students actually walk into the physics lab, they perform some experiment, and they walk out after 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So that's it. I mean, that is the period that you get for actually performing that activity in the physical lab environment. Plus, even in the traditional lab, we also have challenges with respect to what do these young students, which is something that we are all very passionate about, being inclusive in education. How do these labs actually work for those students? So these are some of the challenges. On a different dimension, suppose I want to teach about a simple pendulum, and I want to show what it would be like when the gravity changes. Now, as long anywhere on Earth, the gravity is going to be fixed. There is nothing you can do about changing that gravity. I want to show you how it would look like in Moon, or how it would look like in maybe Mars. Or I want to show you, let's say, a little dangerous chemical reaction, let's say sodium catching fire or whatever. Or maybe I might want to show you a task which actually takes time. Let's say how a mosquito breeds, or how transformation takes place in nature. So these are all constrained in showing them in a physical lab environment, because the physical labs actually do not allow you to do the labs are located on Earth, so you can't change the gravity. There are safety constraints, so you cannot allow dangerous reactions. There will be limitations on how much quantity you can bring, and so on. So on one side, there are restrictions which says, the lab exposure that I am getting in a school is not adequate for me. I want more time, more access to the labs. On the other side, my physical labs are also restrictive, because I am not able to explain or elaborate on every concept that I would actually like to cover. So people have been actually looking at, how do we look at this problem? How do we make education more inclusive, make it more accessible to people? And so two concepts have actually been explored. One is called the virtual labs, and the other is called remote labs. So virtual labs is basically simulation-based labs. So there is no physical infrastructure or there is no physical instrument that you are actually dealing with, but you actually go online, you have a simulated microscope or a simulated pendulum or a simulated, Bunsen burner. In the simulated world, you are able to illustrate different concepts, so you are able to perform activities. Usually, these are computer simulations of important aspects of the lab. So if I want to determine the boiling point of water, I can actually, get a beaker, pour some water into it, put it on the Bunsen burner, and as the water, as the temperature rises, you will see maybe a little bit of bubbles coming in. And at some point in time, it starts boiling. You can look into the temperature and find the reading. So this much actually I can do without actually not having a Bunsen burner by actually simulating these things there. So this is use of virtual labs is also something that the new educational policy actually very strongly recommends, that this is something that is very important, and for the reasons that I mentioned in the previous slide, that this actually particularly enhances or deepens the level of learning. Remote labs is also meant partly from the same purpose, except that there is a physical equipment sitting somewhere which you are actually manipulating remotely. Okay, so there again, that equipment is a constraint. But when you have a very, very sophisticated or very expensive equipment, it is very difficult to simulate it. So you actually look at remote labs. So I'm going to focus primarily on virtual labs, and OLabs is also an example of virtual labs. So that's what I will be looking at during the rest of the talk. So virtual labs, we are now talking about the simulation labs, and OLabs is a good example of it for this audience. So what does virtual labs give you? It gives you unconstrained availability. Whether it is night or day or summer or winter or school is closed or open, you get onto the net, you can perform the lab, right? So once the lab is developed, like what is there with olabs.edu.in, anybody can go to that website any point in time and perform a lab activity as many times as you want without any questions being asked. When you are burning magnesium in OLabs, you don't actually pay for the magnesium. This is a simulated magnesium coil that actually syncs. So it is unconstrained availability. It's a trivial cost that is once it is developed. However, building these labs is non-trivial. It's a fairly expensive effort in terms of manpower and technology. But once it is done, you can actually use it as much as possible. And I mentioned earlier that the limitations of physical labs. So simulations, by definition, they attempt to mimic the reality. And this is very important when you are looking at proper usage of virtual labs. And we are not duplicating the real reality there, but we are mimicking it, and to a reasonable extent. So, for example, if you take boiling the water in a beaker to determine the boiling point, you keep the Bunsen burner for a long time, you would expect that the water will actually evaporate completely and that the beaker will start getting heated, it will melt, etc. But that is not the intention of the lab. So we will stop at the point when the temperature rises enough that you can actually measure the boiling point and we are done with it, right? So you don't actually go beyond, maybe the lab catching fire or the instruments catching fire, etc. So there are boundaries that are ignored beyond a point for which the simulation is not critical. Similarly, when you do Hooke's law in physics, the linearity that is assumed in Hooke's law is not applicable for the entire stretch. So if you put 1 ton or something on a spring, you don't expect Hooke's law to follow. So we assume that the weights that you are using is within that boundary. So there are boundaries which are beyond which the simulation may not necessarily hold. But that's perfect because that is actually what we want to do in the lab as envisaged in the curriculum. We also introduce a lot of simplifications to make things more easier to understand, easier to get across to you. And we can also, because it is a simulation, you can manipulate the time scale. So I can set 1 second of my system time as equivalent to, let's say, 1 month of the physical time. Or I can take 1 second of my system time to mean 1 microsecond of the physical time. So I can slow down fast reactions, I can speed up the very slow reactions. So this is how you can actually feel comfortable dealing with reactions which are happening at a very different time scale. There is also new opportunities like, I can simulate, I can change the value of G in my simulation, and you can pretend that you are on the moon surface or in the Jupiter surface, which is something that you couldn't have done with the physical lab. So virtual labs, other than making the physical labs available without a constraint, is also making new opportunities for all of you teachers to understand, to take your child's imagination much beyond, right? There are new avenues that is becoming available to you to illustrate, to demonstrate things to the children. So if you look at it from this point of view, virtual labs can actually be a very powerful instructional device. You are actually able to demonstrate things as it happens by building up quality simulations. Okay, so how effective are these? There is many who believe that these are big enablers for education, because as I said, if you don't have physical lab infrastructure, or you don't have enough of it, you actually get to feel what the physics lab or a chemistry lab actually is, and where the education infrastructure is not adequate. And even if it is available, you are able to amplify, you are able to get a lot more opportunities to perform that experiment than what a physical lab would do. So obviously it is able to, as I use the term here, amplifier. So we are not at all talking about replacing the physical lab. We are not saying that once you have your virtual lab, you forget it, you don't have to go to the lab. I mean, if you haven't gone to a chemistry lab and have felt the smell of hydrogen sulfide, I think your chemistry lab experience is incomplete. Right? If you haven't broken a test tube, there is a picture that is missing. So real life experiences are important for a complete picture. So we are still underlining that. But when that real life experiences can be provided only up to a limitation, we take that role beyond that and say amplify that by using virtual labs. So although there are people who has this kind of concern that by creating the simulation, are we constraining their thinking? Will they start becoming believing the simulation as real and so on? There is enough other side to show that these are actually very powerful instructional devices. And while we address these things, there is a lot we can do to make it a positive experience, and that is what actually OLabs has done and is continuing to do in the new avatars that we are talking about. So what can we do? One of the things that you can do is to provide a comprehensive ecosystem. So if you go to the internet, you can find lots of simulations for anything that you want. You can simulate algorithms, you can simulate devices, you can simulate, but these are the core simulators. There is no ecosystem around it. So making use of this simulator in your class or for your personal use is actually a very challenging process. So if you could actually make a comprehensive ecosystem that we can provide along with the lab, that it's a self-contained environment, you are able to make the lab more effective. Understand the pedagogical aspect and adopt relevant usage pattern. So we look at how the lab should be done, because again, if you go to a chemistry lab, an open lab, you can do all kinds of things there. But a student in a school is not expected to go to the lab and choose any chemical of anything that he likes and perform the activity. He usually has a very well-defined activity that he wants to perform. So when you create that sort of a scaffolding, you are able to make more focus, because the attention is focused on a particular aspect. And how should I make use of this lab that is generated is also a key concept, and that's what we are going to talk about in bulk of what I'm in the remaining session. You can provide a rich set of affordances and guidances. Again, I'll talk about a little more into it. And put all these things, integrate the lab into the curriculum. So as people said, you have all the videos on YouTube, you have so much of online material that's available. But that is not enough for us to become expert on everything. We want to have a curriculum, we want to have a pattern, we want to build it into the curriculum, and that is when these activities becomes important, and that's also where teachers becomes very important. So when a teacher introduces a lab and say, well, now that you have understood the theory, let us go to this lab, let us perform this experiment and then ask question, what does it mean to you? You are actually able to integrate that experience into the curriculum. And this is very important because that's a key element of making these resources effective. So what do I mean by the ecosystem? So for example, when you perform that activity, you might want to check the theory relevant to it. What was the formula used? What are the parameters that is there? Under what conditions is the theory, the equation that is, or the theorem that is relevant. So this information is something that you want to have access to it. You want to understand the process and its implications. So when I do this experiment and I get some results, what does it mean? How do I interpret it? What does it actually mean with respect to the theory? Okay, when does it substantiate the theory? When does it, conflict with the theory? How do I explain the variations? You want to understand the process and implications. And then some labs will require you to take measurements, like Hooke's law. You need to measure the length of the string and do that over multiple weights, and then you create a plot, and then you want to see that there is a straight line. The whole lab ends only when you are actually able to see that the curve is a straight line. And of course, you might also want to have review questions and references to take it from beyond that. So when you just have only the core simulator, these elements are actually missing there. By making an ecosystem, which is what OLAPS has done, all these things become available to you under one umbrella, right? So you don't have to go out of it. You don't have to go and run into your book or to ask the teacher what is the theory of formula. So as this slide shows, that every lab in OLAPS has this. There is a tab called theory, procedure, animation, simulator, video, viva, resources, and feedback. So typically, this is the structure that every lab in OLAPS actually contains. So when you are doing something and you want to know more about what is the theory corresponding to it or what is the procedural implications, you can actually go and click the tab and get it. Right. In addition, we also have a lot of options here that you can see on the left. Select the metal, length of the wire, diameter of the wire, resistance of the rheostat. So these are affordances that is provided for you to create a controlled lab environment. So you don't actually have to fiddle with everything that is there in the lab environment, but you can actually use these affordances to make enough changes which are within reasonable limits of that lab activity. But at the same time, you are able to try out with a lot of combinations. For example, the wire, you can change different types of wire and then see what happens. And you can make the wire longer, you can make the wire shorter, and then see what happens to the current or the resistance. Right. So this is what is meant by the ecosystem building, which is something that we have been trying to look at in OLAPS. Now, how do I use OLAPS? What are the ways in which it is best used? So, as I mentioned, compared to the many simulations that are available online, OLAPS actually provide a complete ecosystem for the lab, right? So everything is available, including a table on which you can write down the readings that you have picked up for different activities. You have even a graph plotter wherever that is applicable. So all of these are actually made available to you. And we also make sure that the terminology is consistent across the tab. The theory talks the same language as procedure and the animation and the simulation, so you don't actually have problems of referring to confusing sources. The labs as of now are completely compliant with the NCERT curriculum. So if you are following an NCERT book, you will find that every terminology, everything actually matches with the NCERT references, and therefore it's easier for you to adopt them. The content is reviewed and approved by CBSE teachers, so there is authority in the content that is being presented to you. And we also build in a high degree of interactivity for the learner and multiple affordances like what I showed you earlier. So the learner is actually expected to build the connections by dragging wires across, and he has to make adjustments to the multimeter. He has to look into the ammeter or voltmeter and find out what is the reading and make a record of that. So every activity that he is supposed to do in the physical lab, in a sense, we are actually mimicking that. So it is not passively watching a video or an animation, that the student is actually playing around and with adequate affordances there. Therefore, OLAPS is something that is ready for use. So if you want to use it for tomorrow, you are ready. Everything is that you need are available to you. Now, for specific cases of usage, the one way to look at OLAP's usage is to before go to the physical lab. So you know that tomorrow there is a lab for your students on Hooke's Law. You can use OLAP's Hooke's Law lab to prepare them for it. Usually students have no idea what to expect in the lab, what kind of things will be there. So, and even if you tell them there will be a stand, there will be a spring, it is still kind of left to their imagination what it will look like. But by opening up the OLAP's Hooke's Law tab, you can actually show them what that lab environment is going to look like when they get there, what they are supposed to do. They can actually walk through the entire process as if they are in the physical lab. Right? So being prepared will help them to use the limited lab time available more effectively, because they know what is supposed to be done, what are the things that they will find, what are the things that they will not be able to do. They are well prepared for making use of that time. This is another one aspect of amplification. OLAPs mimics the experimental setup with high fidelity. So we are actually made sure that most of the interactions, the look and feel, and the experimental setups are quite visually similar to what actually happens in the real lab, particularly for physics, chemistry, and biology. So use the virtual lab as a preparatory ground before going to the physical lab to amplify that limited time that you get in the physical lab. The second usage mode is to after the physical lab. So as I mentioned earlier, within a 1 hour lab or 1.5 hour lab that you get to the student, there is only limited amount of things that they can do. They can try a few weights and and they have to follow some pattern and may take the reading, get the signature of the lab teacher, and then move out of the lab. So due to resource constraint, due to time constraint, they can do only limited amount of options. Let them do that. Let them do that. They get a physical feel. They know what it looks like, how the thing actually looks when it is stretched, or when the image of focal length, the object that you put for focal length, you can see how it changes its appearance. So that's good enough. You have got a basic feel of in reality. So in the lab, adequate time to reflect may not be there. So you can use the OLAPs as a post-lab reflective usage, right? Ask the learner to explore the virtual lab in more detail. So you can try out more scenarios once they come back from the lab in the class. Show them the OLAPs and show that, okay, here is what happens. So what do you think is going to happen? Will it become longer? Will it become shorter? How much more longer will it be? So you can ask this introduce this kind of reflective activities in the class as a post-lab activity. Okay, so that's also going to be useful to deepen the understanding that they would have got from the physical lab. So use reflection in the class with specific scenarios. The usage mode 3 is ignore for the time being that you are talking about a lab. I can use this as a teaching device. Suppose I want to teach about Hooke's law or how to determine the focal length of a lens. I'll open up the OLAP's virtual lab and I'll show, okay, so here is the stand. I'm putting a spring there and I'm going to put weights. How will the elongation vary proportional to the weight that I have put there? So as a concept illustration also, you can look at you making use of these labs, right? So as an instructional device. So as OLAPs can function as a replica of the lab setup for this purpose. So you can actually show the scenario, ask questions or explain things. So students will be able to relate to it because they can actually see things happening in the real life. Right? So like when you teach a pendulum, you can actually say, suppose I was going to do it in moon, what will it look like? You can actually simulate it and then show that, okay, this is what is going to happen. So demonstrate the intended behavior using OLAPs. Use affordances provided to try to select use cases. Encourage the learners to try them out on their own also. So you can ask them to go back and try these things later on to get more deeper ideas. So that's the third use case that I have for you. Then the fourth use case is active learning strategies, because this is something that is being very actively encouraged in many cases, and I think in the NEP also, that instead of lecturing being the primary mode of teaching, you actually do some of this outside by watching videos or reading books, but use the classroom for active learning mode like flipped classroom. So where we discuss ideas, we explore things in the actual classroom, right? So if I can replicate a lab setup in the classroom, then I can actually use that as a very fertile ground for those doing this kind of discussions. So I can actually put up the stand and put up this thing and say, okay, now if I got for this weight, this is the length I got. Or if I put this weight, what will happen? So there could be enough thinking happening more or less. So, people who are doubtful, and then you can have discussions. You can then create different scenarios. You can, check out for the, different terminal cases and so on. So you can conduct an experiment, stop it arbitrarily, and ask the learners to predict what happens, for example, right? So what happens if a weight of 25 kilograms is put in the on the spring in Hooke's law? What happens to the image as the candle moves closer to the focal point of a length? So a lot of driving questions can be set up with that simulated or replicated lab setup. This can make your active learning strategies very, very effective. So it also deepens learning, and there is also encourages reflection, because they have to first think what would happen, then go and verify it with what has been demonstrated. So they're able to cross-check and correct any misconceptions that they may have. So the fifth use case is a little bit of a pathological case where there is no physical lab. There are a number of schools where there is no lab facility available, or it could be because of things like pandemic where the school is closed and therefore there is no physical lab. Either way, at least by using virtual lab, you are able to give them a feel of what the physical lab actually will function like. So performing the activities as envisaged, maintaining lab records, getting a feel of the lab activities, at least you will get that much. Of course, as I said, if you go to a chemistry lab, the first thing that hits you is the smell. Now on all labs, you don't get that smell. You are only going to see, and you get a feel of what equipments are there. But you don't get the smell. You cannot wet your thing. Even if you pour acid on your hand, you will not get burnt. Right? It's a simulated environment. But yes, in the absence of any physical environment, you are able to get a feel of what it actually looks like. You can still conduct your examinations and ask questions and so on. There are also lab-specific affordances. So for each lab, there are a set of options. I showed you in an earlier screen that for that particular thing, there are 3 or 4 parameters that we have set up where which you can change within reasonable limits. Those limits are chosen so that you don't exceed the boundaries within which that theory is applicable. So it's make sure that you are within that. And so in each lab, there is a set of affordances. These are chosen based on the expectation and requirements of the lab. So like, for example, for simple pendulum, you can change the wire length, the value of G, the material of the blob, and so on. If you want to do tense conversion in English, you can choose the source and target tenses, where you can say present perfect to past to continuous, or whatever is the combination. You can set it out to your own, whichever way you want to explore. And we also provide, for example, in the same lab, that a list of words are provided, so you don't have to type in words there, so you can actually drag and drop there. So a lot of the lab-specific affordances are also included in these labs to make that experience more comfortable, and rather than just watching it like an animation. We also provide support tables to record data when there is multiple iterations of the experiment. Plotting provision wherever it is applicable. Once the values are given in the table, you can actually plot, and you can actually see the graph. You can click to perform where fine-grained mouse control may be difficult. So, for example, when you want to connect a wire in the physical lab, it is simpler because you actually get the wire in your hand. You can tie it up in one nail and drag it and tie it up on top. That's actually much more difficult in a virtual lab. So sometimes you say you just click, a wire actually kind of gets connected. Okay, so that you don't have to go up around for the connecting point there. So these are also things that you will need to that can actually be done. So there are challenges that is also there in something like this. So for example, one of the things that people have always been concerned about is, how do I evaluate a lab activity? So you have all the labs, there is something called a lab examination. How do I evaluate a lab even in a physical lab setup? And on virtual lab, it gets more challenging. There are no accepted standards yet. So, but if you have a way of evaluating in the context of physical lab, you can replicate that even in the virtual lab. So under your supervision, you can ask the person to go and conduct that experiment and record what he has found, and and you can check whether he is able to understand it. Proper and timely guidance in the lab is important. So this is something that we have realized during the pandemic, because the OLAPS was primarily meant as a teacher support device. But then we found that a lot of students are actually wanting to use it directly, and sometimes they get lost in the lab because, we kept the lab as a lab, so there is no built-in guidance there. Similarly, one of the challenges is can two or three people do the lab collaboratively? We also wanted to look at immersive experience, retaining interest using some devices, and extending the lab to non-science subjects. So these are some of the things that we are going to take up in the OLAPS NG, where under which we have a lot more labs that is being developed. So you can expect to see most of these being addressed and in the versions to come now. So for guidance, we are trying to look at a guided lab. So there will be kind of like an oracle or a mystical, some agent on the screen actually advising you depending on what the student is doing. So if he puts a beaker and fill up water and leave it there, we'll say, well, now you have to get the Bunsen burner and light it there. So context sensitive advices when a student is stuck is something that's going to happen with respect to guided labs. We also want a peer lab where two more students can actually interact with each other and when they are performing the same lab experiment. So currently in all labs, we have a procedure tab and animation tab. So procedure tab details out the steps that is to be done. So you can go and refer to it anytime. There is also an animation tab with the help options available. So it will tell you that at this point I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. This is what I am observing. This is what it means to me. So in the animation tab, these details are available, but in the actual simulation tab, these are hidden so that you perform the lab activity as expected for this labs. So this is something that is something we have and something that we are working on further for more elaborate experience. Similarly, we are also trying to look at a more improved usage experience. So using a mouse to manipulate everything can actually be a little bit unrealistic. So looking at options to build up more realistic and natural manipulators using a gesture, speech, and haptic devices. And this is very important, particularly from the Divyang students or people who have suffer from or have disabilities which prevent use of keyboard and mouse. Okay, so these are also things that we are trying to look at. Another interesting area to look at is gamification. So currently OLAPS is like every time you come to OLAPS portal and do an activity and go, you are a kind of like that's an independent activity. So when you come back tomorrow, the system doesn't know that it's the same person that's actually coming and doing the experiment there. So with user tracking, we are able to actually associate users with a session, so you can come back and continue tomorrow, and the system remembers that. Plus, it is also kind of create a competitive environment. How the other students in a class or even in across the country, how other students in, let's say, 6th class are doing in the labs. So you get a leaderboard, how many you have completed, how much time you completed that activity, and how accurately you did this. So these are also things that is going to be get measured, and you will create a little more constructive competitive environment to encourage you to make use of this more. As I mentioned, one of the main challenges is extending this idea of lab to non-science subjects. Like, what does a mathematics lab or a language lab or a social science lab mean? We are finding ways of doing that. For example, in mathematics, a lot of theorems that requires you to play around with it. So if you say that the perpendicular bisectors of a triangle something, then I want to actually draw different types of triangle, a right angle triangle, an obtuse triangle, or a acute triangle, and then see whether this property actually holds on, right? So the mathematics lab in OLAPS actually allows you to do this kind of experimenting online, right? So you can convince that yes, this is true, or where the boundaries are. Languages obviously have a lot of language lab practicals where you listen to speeches, you utter things, and then you are able to give, somebody gives you feedback that your pronunciation is not correct. But more importantly, grammar usage. Many people, even in higher classes, have problems with tenses, reported speech, active speech, active voice, passive voice. So these are all places where you could actually think of online activities to give you feedback. So we have actually done that also in OLAPS. I will show you and talk a little bit more about it in my next slide. Okay, and social sciences is a very open area. Like what do you do about history or the geography or environmental science and things like that. So this is something that we plan to do some more work in this area in our next avatar. So the creating a lab environment could be useful, and we are certainly going to do something about those. So as I mentioned, language was one challenge because many people have language problems, and it would be used to good to use this idea for languages. So if you are into teaching languages, you realize that there are 4 aspects to learning a language: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So not all of them are amenable to an online or a virtual lab model of teaching. And across these 4, you have to consider grammar and pronunciation. How do you communicate and the formation of the sentences or phrases. And at a higher level, there are things like coherence, organization, style. These are also to do. So coherence, organization, style obviously is much harder for a machine to check. So maybe a lot of it will continue to be teacher checked. Pronunciation also, there are challenges because good quality Indian speech recognition and synthesis is required. But this is currently happening. So we would expect more of this to happen along the way. But grammar is something that is amenable to automation today. So we have actually done voice conversion, tense conversion, use of proposition. These are available in our labs. So in the English lab session, I think on Thursday, you will actually see more of how these things are being implemented and what is being done. So you can practice that. So these are part of all labs available. So did all labs work? Yes, it did. I mean, today, if you look back, I think it has been a fantastic journey. But initially, it was difficult because people were comfortable with their existing setup, whether if they had a lab or if they didn't have lab. So we did a lot of training till 2019, but the adoption was kind of partial. Then the pandemic struck. Obviously, the whole world changed, and we found everybody is actually coming forward to use our labs. NCERT and CBSE also is conducting programs like this, to encourage usage. So it is actually worked quite well. So it's been a very satisfying experience so far. CBSE and NCERT and schools are happy and looking for more, and which is exactly what we are going to do now. And we need to do further work for more classes and subjects and more innovations to improve effectiveness. Like the questions that I asked about, guidance and other things are being attended to in the OLAB Senji. So that's my last topic. So yes, we are now on to add another 500 more labs to the pool, covering classes 6 to 12 and more subjects like languages, social science, entrepreneurship, programming languages. Many of these things are going to be part of this 500 lab pool. And we also we are looking at many improvements in light of the changes mentioned earlier: learner tracking and analytics, guidance in the lab, augmented reality, virtual reality capabilities, richer simulations, and building more variety within labs. So today, everybody who goes to the Hooks lab actually gets the same spring, same weight, same plot. So these are things we want to create a little more variety. So if you go to a physical lab, even if it is supposed to be the same spring, there are minor differences, like there are random variation that is there because of usage, friction, and things like that. So these are also things that is going to be modeled in the new version. So this is something that should start coming out in the next few months or so. So as I mentioned, today was to give you a feel of what virtual labs are, what can you expect from virtual labs, where is the boundary that is going to come. And tomorrow you're going to look at physics lab in more detail, the actual way the experiments are structured, what you can do, what are the affordances available there. And Wednesday, you're going to look at chemistry and biology labs, and Thursday, maths and English labs. And then we end this round with the security practices on Friday. So keeping the perspective that I have shared today will help you get more out of these sessions, because you have a better idea about what is the environment, what is it that we are talking about, and that will help you to appreciate and make a better use of these lab environments. Okay, so I think that is where I am. I hope I am reasonably on schedule. And so thank you for listening. And I've given you the email address is there, and also the OLAB's website address, as well as the Facebook pages are also there on the slide. So please feel free to visit, share your feedback, and tell us if there is something that we should do, something we shouldn't do. Whatever feedback, that's always welcome, and it's because your feedback that we are able to make this this kind of a resource, and we are more to contribute here.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it.
Yes.
Over to you, Kanya.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I would really like to thank you for telling us all these details about O labs, virtual labs, and what are its technological affordances, and how does it feel, how does it work, and everything related to virtual labs. And like you said that you have already given the schedule for the rest of the week for this online training. And I would just tell you that we have got great response for this program. We have got various compliments for you. I would like to read out a few compliments. People are saying very informative, good effort, very useful and fruitful explanation, and they're even saying it's a very creative lab for scientific study. So thank you from everyone's side for being with us. And sir, we have also received a few questions for you. So should I ask you those?
Yes, we can take, subject to whatever time is available, we'll be happy to answer.
Sure. Although it says O labs, like online labs, but still, is there any way we can use it offline?
Yes, actually, this is something that we realized when we started doing the training with the schools, because most schools don't have, regular internet access. Of course, with the pandemic, people have been adopting to internet in various ways. But most of the school environments do not provide internet access to students and, continuous internet access that would be required. So what we have done is we have actually replicated this entire OLabs content in an offline form, which also you can download. If you want to get more of it, just let us know. We'll give you the link. During the physical training program that we were doing in the last 4 years, we have actually distributed DVDs or pen drives containing this full lab for schools, which they can install in their, in the school desktop or laptop that they have. So yes, it is available in various ways. Of course, what could be missing is that, the connect back to the main lab will not be there. But for most requirements, that doesn't bother you. We want to have you come online because we can get more information about what you use, how you use, what are the challenges. But that apart, the entire experience has been replicated in the offline version. It is available, directly either on download, or you can take a DVD pen drive and make use of it.
Okay. So we'll take up one last question, and that is that can we use OLabs in regional languages as well?
Yes. So that was also something that we had thought about it from the beginning, and particularly the new education policy also talks about education in regional languages. So what we did was we made OLabs with English as the base while we doing the development, and then we translated all of these into Hindi, Malayalam and Marathi, basically demonstrative and partly because our own familiarity with these languages. But we have had, Karnataka, West Bengal and Andhra Pradesh coming forward and saying, yes, they will translate the content and give it to us, so we can actually make these available on the portal. To some limited extent, you can see some amount of Telugu version of the labs and even Kannada version of the lab, but it has not been completed. So if any of you who are listening to me would be interested in contributing, you can take a lab, convert the text and then send it back to us. We will be very happy to make that as part of the thing. And on the OLabs portal, there is a language switch tab available, flag available. So you click on the flag, you can see the list of languages. You can switch to any language at any point in time and complete the activity. So the idea is to, irrespective of the language, the experience is going to be same. So if you are in the middle of reading something and you think, okay, I'm not understanding this, can I see this in Bengali? You just click the tab, just that page will actually come to you in Bengali. So that is the model. So 100% we are for it. Only thing is translation into multiple languages is a very expensive process and we need teachers to do it because, the normal language translators will not be able to do that. So that's a challenge. So if any of you would be like to contribute to it, it will be fantastic. We would be more than happy to incorporate it.
Okay. So should I say that in future we can see it in more regional languages?
Yes, it is something that we are working with CBSE and NCERT also. Basically, anybody who can help us with translation, we'll be more than happy to do it. That technologically we are ready.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. And there's one more question which many of our viewers have asked, that how can I register? So I would like to answer that. Just view here on Google, you have to type CIET. Just look here, CIET, and
Should I unshare so that you can put that up?
no, sir. Sure, sir. So I would like to thank you once again for being with us, giving us your time and this wonderful explanation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope you all use the system and give us your feedback.
Sure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Let's look at the screen. How can you register? That is the question we have received. Click on CIET, Central Institute of Educational Technology. These are the options you can see. Click on events. You can see various options. Come to workshop/training. Click on this option, and there you can see these current activities. This is the online training going on virtual labs for teaching and learning. So you have to click on this particular link. This is everything about this online training which is going on at the moment, and today is the first day. All the details are mentioned here: day 1, 2, day 3, day 4 and even day 5. These are the objectives of the training, and who can participate. It's mentioned here how to participate. These are the registration steps. This is the link. Click on the link and register yourself, participate in this program, watch live training sessions. Here, this is the link of our YouTube channel. These are the mediums through which you can watch our sessions. TV channels are also mentioned, and post-session activity link is also there. So you can also submit your feedback. How did you like it? And for any queries, you can send your email on this email ID, which is training.helpdesk@ciet.nic.in. So this is the page through which you can just participate. This is the QR code. You can scan your QR code and get it yourself registered. This is the process through which you can register yourself, and tomorrow we are coming back sharp at 4 o'clock once again, and we'll discuss the topic, like sir said, that we can also learn various subjects through O-Labs. So tomorrow we'll learn physics through O-Labs. And please stay with us, don't go anywhere. You're watching us on PM eVidya channel number 6 to channel number 12, and we're coming back with another special program of our Sahyog, and the title is going to be Emotional Intelligence, a Key to Happy and Successful Life. So please stay here, don't go anywhere. Namaskar.